Hi everyone. So now that we know how to solve equations and inequalities, we're going to take a look at solving absolute value equations. And hopefully absolute value sounds familiar to you. You've learned that maybe in middle school, but we're going to refresh if you don't remember. Okay, so what is the meaning of absolute value? So absolute value is the distance between a number and 0. Okay, so the absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of -10 is 10. Because when you're talking about distance, we do not refer to it as negative. So if we're talking about a distance, it's going to be positive. So we use this symbol here, these two bars, to display absolute value. So if we have a positive x value in here, the absolute value of a positive x is x. And if we have a negative value in here, so the absolute value of negative x is also positive x. So this little symbol here is plus minus, so it means plus or minus x. So it's always going to come out positive, if it's positive or if it's negative. It's only going to become negative if the negative is on the outside of the absolute value bars. Okay, so that would give you a negative answer. But if your value, if your expression, whatever, is inside the absolute value bars, it's always going to come out positive. All right, an absolute value equation or function is an equation that contains an absolute value expression. An example being y equals the absolute value of x. So this is an equation that contains an absolute value expression, which is right here, the absolute value of x. Okay, so hopefully you understand what absolute value is and what it does. So we're going to start solving equations that contain absolute value bars. All right, sample example before we start solving. If we have the absolute value of x is equal to 5, then that means x is equal to 5 or x is equal to -5. It can equal either one of these, because if you take either one of these and you plug it back in for x, you'll see the absolute value of positive 5 is 5, and the absolute value of -5 is also 5. So when we're solving absolute value equations, we are going to get two answers. Okay, so here we have positive 5 and -5. Therefore, if the absolute value of x is equal to y, then x is equal to y or x is equal to -y. Because if you plug those values back into your equation, you're going to see that the absolute value of y and -y is just y. Okay, so when we are solving absolute value equations, the first thing we always want to do is isolate the absolute value expression on one side of the equal sign. It is not always by itself. So for today, we're only going to look at examples where it is by itself, just so we can get used to solving them. Tomorrow is when we're going to start looking at having to isolate the absolute value bars in order to solve. But today, we don't really have to worry about this step, but it is a very, very important step, especially with the equations that we're going to see tomorrow. So once the absolute value bars are isolated, we are going to solve two equations. We're going to set that expression that's inside the absolute value bars equal to a positive value and equal to a negative value. And it might become a little clearer when we do an example together, but x is, that represents the absolute value expression between the absolute value bars. So when we create those two equations, we're going to get rid of those absolute value bars, set it equal to a positive value, and set it equal to a negative value. And the third step is to check your solutions so you know that you have the right answer. It's really easy to check these. All right, so this first example, we have the absolute value of -3h is equal to 21. So we can see here that these absolute value bars are isolated. There's nothing on the outside over here, and there's nothing on the outside over here. It's just, oops, let me go back. It's just absolute value of this is equal to this. So we don't have to worry about that first step. So now to solve this, we're not going to just dive right into solving this. We need to get this out of the absolute value bars. So what we're going to do is create two equations. We're going to take our expression out of the absolute value bars and set it equal to a positive value, 21. Okay, that is our first equation. negative 3h is equal to 21. Now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to set it equal to a negative value. So we have negative 3h is equal to negative 21. Okay, so hopefully you can see I took this out of the absolute value bars, set it equal to positive 21. Out of the absolute value bars, set it equal to negative 21. You're going to do that every single time as long as these are isolated. All right, then from there, we just solve the equation like we normally would. You see we have negative 3, so we're going to divide on both sides. If you want, draw on those train tracks. You can do that for both. And we're going to get that to cancel out, so we get h equals negative 7. All right, let's do the same thing with the other equation. We're going to divide by negative 3 on both sides. That cancels out, so we get h is equal to positive 7. So in some cases, you are going to get the same number where one's positive, one's negative, but this does not apply to every absolute value equation. Okay, so that's why it's really important to separate these out and solve both equations separately. Okay, let's take a look at another example. Here we have the absolute value of 2x minus 1 is equal to 7. So let's do the same thing. We see that these are isolated, so we don't have to take any initial steps. So we can go right into separating it. So we have 2x minus 1 equals a positive 7. That's our first equation. And then 2x minus 1 equals negative 7. Did the same thing before. Take this expression out of the absolute value bars, set it equal to a positive value. Take it out of the absolute value bars, set it equal to a negative value, and solve from there. So you can go ahead and write your train tracks in. Here we would want to add the 1 first. And I'm going to just solve both of them separately. Don't try to solve them both at the same time. It can get a little confusing if you do that. Just solve it one equation at a time. And hopefully at this point, you're a pro at solving two-step equations, so this shouldn't be too complicated. If it is, please go back and review some of the past videos that we've posted if you're still having trouble solving equations. Okay, same thing. Let's add this 1 on both sides. That cancels. We get 2x is equal to a negative 6. Divide by 2 on both sides. And we get x is equal to a negative 3. So in this case, it was different. We don't have the same number where one's positive, one's negative. We have two completely different numbers. X is equal to 4 and x is equal to negative 3. So I'm going to just write that over here and we're going to just check these real quick. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and erase this because we solved it. And I just want to plug these in and see what we get. Just to check it, to make sure we have the right answer. It's really easy to check your answers when you're solving equations. So I have the absolute value of 2. Instead of writing x, I'm going to write 4. I'm going to substitute that in. Then I'm going to bring everything else is going to stay the same. Now we're going to do it inside the absolute value bars. So we get the absolute value of 2 times 4 is 8. Bring everything down. The absolute value of 8 minus 1 is 7. And then the absolute value of 7 is equal to 7. So that is an answer for this absolute value equation. Let's try this again, but let's do it with negative 3 this time. So we have 2 times, instead of writing x, I'm going to write parentheses negative 3 minus 1. Let me just make sure that looks like a minus 1. Okay, so we have the absolute value. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Minus 1. Negative 6 minus 1. You can keep change here, and you're going to get negative 7. Same signs, add and keep. And the absolute value of negative 7 is 7. So 7 equals 7. This is also a correct answer to this absolute value equation. So it's really easy to check these. If you're ever confused or you don't understand if you're getting the right answer or not, plug it in, see what happens. But yeah, most important part, isolate your absolute value bars, create two different equations, one's positive, one's negative, and solve from there.